right now. We begin in Wisconsin. CBS News projects that moderate David Crowley will narrowly defeat Democratic socialist Francesca Hong in the Democratic primary for governor. You see it right here. The race came down to the wire. Hong trails Crowley by fewer than 4,000 votes. It's a bit of an upset in a race where Hong's left-wing policies gave her a comfortable lead in the polls leading up to the election. And the match is set in Minnesota. CBS News projects progressive Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan will win the Democratic nomination in another example of the party's civil war. She'll face a Republican candidate, former NFL reporter Michelle Tafoya, in November. Flanagan rallied supporters last night.
I have been telling you that this campaign was about the many versus the money. Well, guess what? The many just won.
And let's talk about South Carolina. President Trump's endorsement wasn't quite enough for political newcomer Darlene Graham to secure the Republican nomination for Senate. CBS News projects that she and Congressman Ralph Norman will advance to a runoff vote to decide who will replace Graham's late brother Lindsey Graham on the ticket in November. They each made an appeal to voters last night.
South Carolina and President Trump need a leader who's tough, principled, and will fight to advance our conservative values in Washington.
I want everybody to unite and come with us because we've got the right message. I've got a great resume that I'm proud of.
And we have team coverage for you this morning. CBS News political director Fin Gómez is standing by in our D.C. bureau. Let's start with CBS News Elections and Surveys Executive Director Anthony Salvanto here in studio to break down that tight race in Wisconsin. Anthony, good morning. This was an extraordinarily close race. Not quite what the polls predicted also. What happened there?
Well, look, what we see is these divisions or splits within the Democratic Party, and this is playing out for an audience across the country who's watching this. You're looking at one place where we saw these splits play out, and let me show you. This is a map of Wisconsin. I'm going to dive in even deeper with the help of our friends at Vote Hub, and I'm going to show you by town. The purple areas here went for Crowley. I'm going to zoom in on Milwaukee, just as an example. You see around the central part of the city, a lot of younger voters, which was expected, as you point out, for Hong, but then a lot of the very core Democratic areas in the city going for Crowley. And if I zoom out here a little bit, you see places where you have a lot of Democrats, Madison, around the university, that going for Hong, but then all the rest, including a lot of suburbs for Crowley. What's the story that I'm telling? These are the kinds of places that Democrats will argue they need to win and be successful come November. So that's the argument of nominating, in this case, somebody they saw as more moderate.
And Anthony, jumping off of that, talking about November, what are the national implications for the eventual winner of this governor's race?
I think that this is one of many races where you see these differences within the Democratic Party about direction. Is it more progressive? Is it more moderate? And the kinds of candidates that they're going to nominate. One of the central themes as you go into November is, do the Democrats need to kind of rally a core base, which it might seem some progressive candidates can do, but do they need to win more moderate and more centrist voters, which of course any campaign needs to do. And so that'll be the argument for something like this playing out in many places.
And do they have a shot? Does Crowley give them a better opportunity in November?
This will be, as Wisconsin always is, starting out as a toss-up, but you expect Wisconsin to always be close. You expect folks like me to stay up really late watching the returns come in. Maybe November will be the same way.
All right, Anthony Salvanto, thanks for breaking things down for us.
Thanks.
And let's go to CBS News political director Fin Gómez for the results in Minnesota and South Carolina. Fin, good morning. So a progressive beat out a moderate in the Midwest. So what does this signal for the Democratic Party?
First of all, Michael, can I just give a shout out to Anthony, who was I got 2 hours of sleep last night. I think Anthony got 0 hours of sleep last night, so just kudos to him. But no, Michael, looking at the Minnesota results, I think what last night really showed us is that there's still a very active debate inside the Democratic Party, Anthony alluded to this, about what kind of candidates voters want heading into November in this crucial midterm election. In Minnesota, you did see that the progressive Peggy Flanagan defeat the more moderate Congresswoman Angie Craig in that key Senate primary, and I think that's another significant win. Remember, just a week before, the progressive Abdul El-Sayed won in Michigan in that Senate primary fight. But I think Wisconsin gave us almost the opposite result. I mean, if you look at David Crowley, he's more of a traditional Democrat. He narrowly defeated, as you know, Francesca Hong, a self-described Democratic socialist, who had been the front runner in many of these polls leading into Election Day. Some had her up as high as 20 points. So I just a little alarm bell there for some of those polls that we saw. So we can't really say Democratic voters are moving uniformly to the left. I would argue. I think we saw that split ticket result in the Midwest yesterday. I think what we can say is that Democratic primary voters are very motivated and are willing to reject the establishment candidate. And I think that debate breaks down. I think this debate breaks down to the moderates' electability argument versus the one you're hearing from progressives, which is that they are better suited to be more aggressive, to be better fighters against the Trump administration, and to take on the Democratic establishment, despite having some unconventional and controversial views for some in potentially in those voters in the general election. So I think Democratic voters want change and they want fighters, but they also want fighters who they think can win in a general election. Michael.
Now, Finn, let's talk about what happened in South Carolina. President Trump's endorsement of Darlene Graham didn't seem to be enough because we're headed to a runoff. So does the president's support still have the juice with Republicans, or was this more about Graham's lack of experience?
I think it's probably more complicated than saying that Donald Trump has suddenly lost his influence with Republican voters. He still has a significant amount of sway. If you look overall in the endorsements that he's made this primary cycle, you could see that the overwhelming majority of his picks have won. And I think Darlene Graham did have the president's endorsement. She had the Graham name ID, of course, and the advantage of serving in the Senate after being appointed to following her brother's untimely death a month ago. But now she faces Congressman Ralph Norman in that August 25th runoff. But also, as you noted, this is her first race. She's a first-time candidate with very little political experience of running on her own, and she was running against some pretty experienced politicians in a very crowded field. And I want to emphasize that point. Very crowded field, 10 people. Now that there's a runoff, there will only be 2. She needs to consolidate some of her support, some of the support from Russell Fry and others. But I think that it will be a pretty tough race, and we'll see how that plays out in 2 weeks from now.
All right, Fin Gómez, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.